when weakness becomes strength. 2 Corinthians 12 verses 2 to 10. Brothers and sisters, today we look at one of the most intimate moments in Paul's life. 2 Corinthians 12 verses 2 to 10. In this passage, Paul opens a window into his soul. He shows us both the heights of heaven and the depths of human struggle. And in doing so, he teaches us a truth that every believer must learn. God's power shines brightest in our weaknesses. Paul begins by describing a man in Christ who was caught up to the third heaven. Bible scholars agree. Paul is talking about himself. 14 years earlier, he had a heavenly vision so glorious that he could hardly put it into words. He heard things so sacred that he wasn't even allowed to repeat them. If anyone had a reason to boast, it was Paul. He had revelations. He had encounters with the Lord. He could have used this to prove how spiritual he was. But listen to Paul's heart. He refuses to boast in spiritual experiences. Why? Because Paul wants people to judge him not by mystical stories, but by the life they see. He wants them to see Christ, not his resume of revelations. And then the tone shifts. After describing the heights of heaven, Paul brings us to the reality of life on earth. He says, to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. We don't know exactly what this thorn was. Some say it was a sickness. Others say persecution. Others say a spiritual attack. But we do know one thing. It was painful, persistent, and humbling. Paul calls it a messenger of Satan. Yet he also knows that God allowed it. Isn't that mysterious? The enemy wants to use our struggles to destroy us. But God uses the same struggles to shape us. What the enemy intends for harm, God transforms for good. And in Paul's case, the thorn was given so that pride would not take root in his heart. 3 times Paul prayed for God to take it away. 3 times God said no. And in that moment, God spoke words that changed the direction of Paul's life and ours. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God did not remove the thorn. He gave Paul something far better, sustaining grace. Delivering grace is when God takes the problem away. Sustaining grace is when God gives you strength to stand while the problem stays. And sometimes, God's greatest miracles happen not when He changes the situation, but when He changes us within the situation. Paul learned that weakness is not a disqualification. It is an invitation. An invitation to experience the power of God. When we come to the end of ourselves, we find the beginning of God's strength. When we stop relying on our own ability, God's ability flows in. So Paul boldly declares, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. This is not self-pity. This is surrender. This is a man who discovered that when he is weak, Christ is strong. Paul learned to see weakness differently. He said, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. Not because they are pleasant, but because each one becomes a platform for God's power. Church, maybe today you have your own thorn. Maybe it's sickness. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's a failure you can't shake off. Maybe it's a situation that seems impossible. Maybe it's a prayer you've prayed again and again, but the answer hasn't been what you expected. Here's the good news. God's grace is still sufficient. Not yesterday's grace. Not tomorrow's grace. But grace for today. Strength for today. Power for today. The world says, hide your weakness. God says, bring it to me. The world says, show them how strong you are. God says, let my strength be seen in you. The world says, you need more power. God says, you need more grace. So let Paul's confession become ours. When I am weak, then I am strong. Not because weakness has power, but because Christ meets us there. May we learn to trust Him not only on the mountain of revelation, but also in the valley of a thorn, knowing that His grace will always be enough.